tell all of you stories. And the stories that I tell you are very personal and they relate to me, my interactions with each of them. And yeah, with that, let's begin. I do this chronologically. Say one particular incident. And I remember I had a very important case the next day. I was frightened, I was scared, I was inexperienced, but I loved the job. And I'd done all the work that I possibly could. And I was due in court the next morning, so that's 8 o'clock. But at 5:30, the boss called me to the office. 5:30, not earlier, 5:30, because he knew that I was stressed. And we went through the papers, and Dato just told me, and I had just taken over the file from my predecessor. And both of us had studied in the UK and so on. And he just looked at me and he said, "Oh, both of you are stupid bitches." You know, so to my face. So I didn't, at that moment in time, I think I was too shocked. But when I think about it, being called a bitch is really not a big deal. That wasn't it. It was the stupid part that I couldn't quite cope. To this day, I often wonder what manner of man who was actually intellectually inferior, even in terms of paperwork, you know, the qualifications, would call another lawyer a stupid person. So now when you say, you know, what is the level at which we have to stop? Would you call bad language? I mean, we're never going to stop. You know, you can go on saying, oh, you know, managers are not going to call people bad language. You know, your story of throwing. That brings me to my next question. Do you honestly think that if you put a law in place, it is going to stop people bullying, your employer from bullying you?
I think it does, but it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be the law as such, but individual companies, organizations have now a sort of a charter or a policy that every employee has to sign. And when they join the organization, just like, you know, you're made to sign a child protection policy in certain industries, right? So like that, you do sign a anti-bullying policy as well. And in that, generally, they make reference to what constitutes bullying in a general sense or in a particular sense affecting that particular organization. But it is rather difficult to define what really bullying is, the finer points, because I do agree with what Dato Ramli mentioned just now. You know, sometimes things are done with the intention of bringing out the best in somebody else, a subordinate or a student. So there could be instances like this where that particular interaction is then interpreted as bullying. It may not be so. But I think the central theme here is really to understand that bullying involves power dynamics, number one. Somebody who thinks of themselves as you know, mightier than the other. And the intention behind bullying is really to demean an individual, not to educate them, not to bring the best out of them, but the intention is always to demean and to create a hostile environment. So if you looked at it from that perspective, that if, you know, everybody who undergoes military training, for example, now they know what that is, what they're getting into, and that's what military training is about. So for somebody in the military to say that he was bullied by his superior because of a certain prenta that was given, that was construed as something, you know, that's demeaning to that individual, then I think it has to be seen in the context as well, right? So it is a bit difficult to really see what is bullying and what is not, but clearly bullying has got a negative intention, and that intention is nothing to lift up that person or make the person better, but it is to destroy that individual. That's the way I see it.
Well, I completely agree with Andrew with regards to that, because depending on the situation, if you are in a drama class with Joe Hasham, for example, where the four-letter word is being, Bernard, would you agree? Yes? And it's part of that. But I think your example was very easy in the sense that, of course, it's not. Nobody calls a stupid bitch or whatever it is. I wouldn't let anyone get away with that. But I think as we become more civilized, we don't want laws being, we don't want in Bandaraya to have all these kind of things all over the place, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. But, we want to live in a place where everybody kind of know their placement, and this is what civilization is about. And hopefully we are civilized people, that we don't have to kind of function like that all the time. But that does not mean that it's not happening. It is happening, and we hope that there are places where we can make all the right kind of complaint.
Okay, the place where you can make the right kind of complaint. Okay, when I started in legal practice, it was when there was a new term, the HR manager. She was as young as I was, and if I went to make a complaint to her, she was answerable to my boss. And I have two more questions. So my first one is, I think today she didn't have the right to hire and fire. She did not have the right to take the complaint further. She just had the right to accept my complaint. And I remember when I went, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't believe that a man who was intellectually inferior to me could stand face to face and call me a stupid bitch, when actually outside office we would meet at social events. They were events, some of your events, I meet them now, and I don't think they remember it, but I will never forget it. So it was very hard for me. When I was very young, I didn't know what to do. And as I said, until I interviewed him, I didn't even know that was bullying. And so my next question is, I know the answer, but I will ask it anyway. If you know that you are being bullied at the workplace today, what will you do? Incidentally, all the stories that I talk about are in the book. Just a plug for my book. Yeah. So that's my question. If you know, I'll start with him this time. If you know that you're being bullied, where do you go? And whom do you talk to? Within the organization, outside the organization?
Well, I think this is exactly, continuing in from my earlier answer and what the other gentleman has said, I think what's becoming standard is addressing this very issue when people come in and making it clear to them that there's process. And I think what we've done in most of my organizations is that when there is a case of bullying, the person is able to speak to someone who obviously is not in their line of superiors, right, in terms of reporting. So in cases where we have an independent board, that becomes quite easy. We will say, okay, the victim is able to speak to anyone on the independent board, but we will assign someone in particular. So someone in particular, this is the person you go to, you can speak to this person, or you can speak to anyone else. And then we make it clear that any such complaint is confidential and it does not go to the superior, that they're reporting to within the organization. I think that's, but where it's difficult is in very small organizations, which are, 3-4 people, and you don't have an independent board. And I think in those cases, it becomes really tricky. And I would like to hear your answer actually as to how to do that, because that's exactly what's happening in some of the things I'm involved in, particularly with the newer generation, these Gen Z people who are entering the workforce expect a lot of support, voice that expectation, and then I don't know what to say. So I want the answer as well.
Maybe I'll just add on a little bit to that. And if you think that you know, a victim of bullying should take certain measures before probably approaching a sort of a committee or a tribunal or whatever, and that would be to document the incident of bullying very correctly, with the time, the date, and the context, or the where it was done and things like that. So documentation is extremely important. That's one. And number two, when it comes to bullying, I would advise the victim not to retaliate or to be abusive towards the person who is bullying, because that might not really serve their own purpose eventually. If they want to bring it up to a committee or complaints bureau or something like that, it might not really help them. So it is better to just switch off to the person who bullies, but document everything correctly, and don't let what you say be misinterpreted and then be equated with bullying, being abusive towards that person. So I think that's crucial before deciding to use the mechanism within the office. But even with or without that evidence, there's no harm in utilizing any form of protective mechanism within an organization. But it will serve you better if you are able to document all this. And sometimes these bullies may not be done verbally, but it might be over a text message or WhatsApp message. So it's good to keep that as evidence, take snapshots of that, and if there are also witnesses to this, I think these are some of the precautions that must be taken, and more practical precautions. Maybe you'd like to add on.
Yeah? I know what he's about to ask. Precautions. Now, a lot of emphasis, a lot of what you were saying causes stress. Okay, take my situation. I was very young. I was, in my first job. I was very happy because I loved the job. I loved medical legal work. To this day, I love it. And more than the bullying was the shock that, someone of his stature or her stature could say something like that to me. And that caused enormous stress for me. It affected me physically, so on and so on. And the mental stress, since we are in Selangor Mental Health Association, so there is a lot of stress accorded to this. And I am aware that today there are a lot of programs available, there are a lot of resources available. Going to see a psychologist, going to see a counselor is really quite the norm. But I often wondered whether it should be the employee, because the employee has a lot of protection today. So in your question, going back to yours, that in a small organization, employees have a lot of avenues. What about the employer? Shouldn't they be the ones who are encouraged to go for counseling? Because they are the ones who are causing the stress. What about the employer?
Yes, I suppose. I think the answer is yes, but I think, again, it's very important to have those policies in place before any complaint occurs, because once a complaint occurs, that's when people disagree, and that's when people refuse to do anything about it because they think they're in the right. So I think you need to build it in, right? In the event of a complaint or a case of alleged bullying, both parties will go to a counsellor. I think that needs to be baked in. Can they?
That'll be my next question. Can both the employer and the employee go for counseling?
I don't, whenever I have a problem, I just don't run to be counseled all the time. For example, I just use, it's how you negotiate your life through. Bullying happens everywhere in terms of public bullying by the politicians or the Malays over the Chinese, and the Chinese over this, whatever it is. How are you going to negotiate and empower yourself to cope with life? Isn't it? If Akmal is bullying Teresa Koch and all that, are you going to run over and you just know that some people are naturally, the patriarchal thing is gone into their head, or they think so. So I really, I've got just too much things to do to go to run for a counselling all the time, unless it is really fantastically whatever it is. I don't know, Andrew, because I would know how to, if I'm the employer, because of course, all of us try to be as compassionate as possible. But the next question is, what makes a personality brings out the worst in you? Even the employer or the employee. But then you understand? So I really, that's the next question. Why does someone keep niggling you so that you then say something really really irritating to make the situation worse? So that's one. It's almost like in Ayurvedic, you have the three gunas, the Vata, Pitta, and whatnot, is a Kapha. So these are the things, the same situation which different people react so differently. And this is also a very interesting area, that is also, the same people sometimes brings about a problem that is happening all the time. So because I'm always an observer of life, and why is it that this guy or this lady has always get into kind of problems? So anyway, so that's one. So I feel unless the situation is really acute, then I will go for a counselling, or I go to someone really quite knowledgeable about that relationship, the psychology of that and all that. To solve.
I think, just to add on to what he said, there are people, they are natural bullies, they're born to bully others, and these are the sorts probably sometimes also picked by political parties to head certain wings, because they're expected to do that. If that's the terms of reference of being a youth leader, perhaps. Then they move on, 20 years later, they say, that was during the time when we were youth, and that's what being a youth leader is all about, and it's as though everybody else is here is supposed to accept it, and think, that's the journey that a politician takes, and we as ordinary, folks have to accept that. So that's as far as an individual is concerned. But in a company, in an organization, I think to answer Aneeta's question just now, probably, there's a need for capacity building here. Now I'm going to do a little bit of advertisement here, because the Malaysian Mental Health Association also does training for companies in corporate entities in mental health first aid. What this is, this program really empowers managers, HR managers, supervisors to be able to detect cases of distress, psychological distress in the workplace, and something that they might earlier suspect but don't know what are the steps to take in order to approach an employee who has a problem. But this also includes an understanding of what constitutes bullying and what is harassment, because some people might think that they're just making jokes about each other and saying whatever they like. But in today's world, things have, no longer accepted to say things like what they used to do, and what is politically right, what is not. So that course actually helps line managers, HR managers in companies understand this. But at a higher level, I think the owners of the company, the board of directors, the general managers, and all these people have got a different interest in the company, and they might not, fully agree that they have to go through the nitty-gritty of all this and understand what bullying is. They ultimately want the job done. They want money, they want to see profits. So it's difficult to convince those people at that higher level. They'll say, okay, fine, let's have a mechanism here where you have a committee, an independent committee listening to your complaints and things like that. But what we have to do now, the challenge is to convince the owners of these companies, or those directors and all that at that level, the C-suites, to know that what they are doing is not a compassionate measure, but something that makes business sense. Why not try to say, whether they pretend to feel that way or whatever, at least to say that we have anti-bullying mechanisms in place. That increases the profile of the company, and that also in some way contributes to the productivity of the company, because you're going to have less turnover rates of employees, they're feeling better, they're feeling happier in the organization. So I think this whole thing about being compassionate, to be mental health sensitive, all that is very nice, but when it comes to action, ultimately it's it's all about profitability. So you have to turn this into something profitable, something that increases the profile of the organization. And that is where I think the answer is as far as counseling is concerned, because you have already dealt with this in terms of educating, building capacity at the management level and at the lower level. Right? The rest is all about the mechanism of it and how robust is the company policy.
Does that answer your question? Okay, let's add it up. That basically is all my questions. So what I will do now is to throw it open to the floor, and you have panels, and yes. Does anybody have a question? So yes, Sajid.
Hi. I think first, just to add on to you, Prof, ESG, the S in ESG is basically an attempt to do that, right? To convince the board and the C-suite that there is profitability, or however you want to put it. And my question, since we are at the launch of the book, my question is to Aneeta. I've read the book, and at some places I find it uncomfortable, slightly uncomfortable to read. And while writing it or reviewing it, did you feel uncomfortable? Did you see that there would be any consequences to it?
Uncomfortable. Are you asking me whether I was uncomfortable in writing in what I wrote?
One, and did you think of consequences, that how would people react to it?
How did people react to it? Okay, I'll answer that one first. See, at the start of this, I told you about him dancing. And even from a very young age, I already realized, I watched him dance that day. This is going back to the 1980s, and it stayed with me, that if you want to do something, you do it so much. You have a word for it, rasa, isn't it? Yes. So once you are in that rasa, you really don't care. It is your communion with the divine. So when I write, sometimes it's a bliss. It's other writers. I don't know. So many of you here are writers, So do you feel that? Do you feel the same thing? When you do your work, you reach a state of bliss that the consequences really don't matter. And so as I write, that's what it is. Am I scared? Are you talking about My Final Tapasya? Is that the story? Okay, for those of you who don't know, My Final Tapasya is about a girl who survives a cult, being in a cult. And in the last part, all my stories have got mental health issues. They all have a quote by him, and many of them are about suicide and attempted suicide and so on, and various stages of sadness. So, was I scared? No. Why should I be scared? Because if you have, that whole story came about because my mother was in hospital. She was in the ICU, and it was 7 o'clock in the morning. I had just had her admitted, and I really didn't know whether she was going to live or die because the cardiologist basically said, we'll try our best. And at that moment in time, I reached out to 3 people, the 3 people who meant the world to me at the time. And in the story, you will read it, it's not something that I'm afraid of. And one of them is the guru who wrote a message to me and said, your energies right now are so negative, you will kill your mother. You will kill, the word is kill. So why should I be scared about somebody who's writing to me? And then my friend, supposed best friend, you know her. So you are toxic in mind, mouth and mood. Again, these are words, toxic in mind, mouth and mood, stupid bitch, you kill your mother. Why would you say things like that? So I thought about this question because I've been asked about it before. I have asked people, why do you do something? And the man that I love, skip him. So, why? Because his response was also so painful to this day. So I often wonder why. And I think Tapestry of the Mind is my response to figure out why people do that. It was a very difficult time in my life. And why would you write to your disciple, your energies are so negative, you will kill your mother? I didn't know whether to go to the hospital or not. Because if I stand next to my mother and my energies are so negative, and if you've ever been a disciple of a guru's word is law. Whatever he says comes to pass. And when you are in that frame of mind, I remember thinking, is my mother going to live or is my mother going to die? So I sorted it out, and about a month and a half later, I really spiraled out. And so I understand what it is, when someone is in that mode, when you really don't know what you're going to do. So 5 days a week, now I say to my mother, thank you for being alive. Because I think if she didn't live, I would have contemplated suicide, to be really brutally honest. Because I really didn't know what was going to happen. So does that answer your question? Sorry. Any other questions? Next question. Yeah.
Okay.
Professor.
I'm Jayati Roy. Just an incident that I was involved in, but it's in the context of the cultural situation where we are in, which you have not spoken about. If we can look into the cultural context of bullying, especially in this country. I teach, I train, and I was asked to do a training for an organization in Malaysia for the women in the office. And this was a request by one of their managers to say that they need some leadership skills. So I said, well, that's great. And they were all part of one particular race in Malaysia. Okay, I won't mention. All right? Okay. Well, that's like something we shouldn't mention. But in general terms, right? So I had lunch with the head of HR and one of the ladies who was like in charge of this little office. And we went through and I was so excited and I said, yeah, we will do this and we will do that. Then she went back, she spoke to her colleagues and then came back to me and finally said, you know, Professor, all these men in the office treat us like their wives. And somehow we all get bullied, right? And I was thinking very often here, the line between being bullied and the line of between being accused. Well, I have a legal background as well, but that sort of fine line is very often not explained, or even in the journalistic context is used very loosely. You say, oh, these kids were abused, and I said, oh my God, were they all sexually abused, or were they just being bullied? So that dimension or that level of explanation often does not happen. I don't know if I'm correct, but that's why I'm asking, to what extent, I've not read your book, but to what extent should we be cognizant of the cultural context of bullying in the workplace in this country? Sorry, I'm a bit long-winded.
That's it. But I do agree that, you know, you can't have a universal template here. And there are cultural considerations as well. So something that has been, you know, sort of accepted in the cultural sense may not be so today, since we tend to adopt a more Western approach towards company policies and what constitutes bullying and harassment. But I like the point that you brought up with regards to women in the workplace. I think this is a separate topic altogether that has to be focused on, because this is something that we ignore often, and we know that women sometimes have to play multiple roles here. We forget that a woman who could be CEO in her company, but she goes back home and she has to be the wife, she has to be the mother of her children, she's expected to fulfill, to juggle between all these roles and excel in each one of these roles. I remember years ago we had a cabinet minister, very dynamic lady, often she was referred to as the Iron Lady, but she rushed back home and she used to cook for her families, and sometimes she even complained that, her children would say, Anna, why isn't this rendang tasting so nice? And, and she probably wondered, I walk into the building of my ministry and nobody would dare even dream of asking me questions like this. But here I'm at home and my children are saying, I've not cooked proper food for them. And she has to juggle between all these roles. And in the workplace, there is an expectation that, because she's a woman, she has got to, be more meticulous about certain things. And the fact that she has to juggle between these roles also makes her feel guilty at times. And this is what, in psychology they call the imposter syndrome, where you do your best and yet because everybody else is scrutinizing your work or demeaning you in some way, you feel maybe you're not good enough. And in this case, it is true. That's the demand of being a woman. The man gets away with all this, nothing like this happens to him. But being a woman is very much more challenging, and it also can result in very complicated mental health situations and stressful situations, which can result in depression and things like that. So I think we need to pay more attention to this, and the fault is really society, some of our cultural perceptions, our attitudes towards women, and probably our inability to accept women as equals in the workplace. And the sad truth is, even in wages, women often, probably if you did a sort of a market survey, you'll probably realize that the women get paid less than men for doing the same job. I'm not sure whether such a survey has been done, but I'm confident that will be the outcome of the findings. So there are many ways in which a woman employee would feel would be in a disadvantaged position. And there's a likelihood of a woman employee being subjected to sexual harassment compared to a male employee. Not that it doesn't happen to males, but the greater likelihood of this happening to a woman as well. So this is an area that we must, have a sort of a subheading when we talk about mental health in the workplace.
You need to leave? Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Zain needs to leave. So first of all, thank you very much. Oh yes.
Before I leave, I guess I want to say congratulations on the book launch, and I'm very heartened by this conversation. I think three things which I think have come up today. I think both Andrew and Ramli have emphasized that the need for trust, really. That yes, there needs to be some clear things which are explicit in law, but I think by and large, it's for employers and employees and the mental health community to find the solutions as much as possible and build trust within companies, within organizations, rather than relying on legal diktat, in handling a lot of these things. The second thing, what Andrew said about making the economic case, right? Telling companies and educating companies why paying attention to this is profitable. And this, I think this brings some parallel to this in some of the work that I do with refugees and the stateless community. For a long time, it was all about the humanitarian argument, right? Let's give refugees more rights. Let's, recognize, give work rights and health rights and educational rights to refugees and stateless citizens. But the humanitarian argument only gets so far. Once you make an economic argument, then you really push the needle, right? And people start to change their minds. So I just want to say I'm very heartened by that. And I do have to leave. I'm sorry, but congratulations, Aneeta.
Thank you, Tunku. Thank you very much.
But I actually want to answer Prof. Jansi with regards to the cultural aspect where it comes to, say, religious area. Because I'm a very good friend of the Sisters of Islam, which they are still trying to find a way in which there'll be reformations within the Sharia law, for example. Yeah, so this is an area that is really very, very current, because that whole patriarchal system of Islam, for example, needs reformation. And I'm one of the victims because I am doing Indian classical dance, So that's again negotiating your way around the problems that are happening right in front of our eyes everywhere. And because I think, because you're aware of it, most likely you are not going to, you're going to, my life has always been negotiating all this, because life is too short to be fighting something that is coming to you like that. And because don't think that the Malays have got it good, by the way, and now that we mentioned the word, because actually the Malays are facing possibly worse than the other ethnic, because they cannot be anything but what is expected of them. Yeah, the women, and of course, I know this when I was already with Saleh Ben Jonet, where we never play the bourgeois game, and so that created a lot of problems, but it actually made us very strong, and but we managed.
Speaking about that, this is a story that is very special to me in the book called Metopia. And it is about exactly this issue, because the story is about a woman who loses her child because her husband converts to Islam, and without the consent of the wife, converts their child as well. So I do not explore the legalities of it, because that's obvious read any newspaper. But I am heartened because one of the reviewers wrote and said that that was her standout story because it brought about the sadness of a mother. I mean, I don't have children, you know, the closest I had was a dog, who is also featured in the book, Ladu. But, but can you imagine what it's like for your child to be taken away from you? And for the laws of the land, not law of the land, laws of the land to say it's okay to do so. That is a tragedy of gargantuan proportions. You know, with what he said just now about stateless children, so it's so topical, you know, and the stress, so the mental stress of that, I can't imagine. Can you? So, yes, you have a question. No?
So I have it's not exactly a question that has one answer. From my experience when I ask this, people give subjective answers, so I just want to hear thoughts. What are your thoughts about when it comes to mental health and essentially everything, that in order for humanity to improve on how they handle these kinds of topics, sacrifices tend to be made? Like, for example, I'm going to use an example, lobotomies and electric chair treatments in the past. In the past, people didn't know that those were inhumane ways to treat mental illnesses. But it's only after sacrifices were made, when people went through those procedures, that they realized this is not okay to do to any human being ever. And that was in the past. Maybe in the future now, there are some procedures that we do not know about at the current moment in time that are not exactly humane to do to anyone, but maybe in the future we will know. I just want to know what are your thoughts, like, on us needing to go through stuff like that in order to improve, like, those people. I just want to know.
Okay, I will answer that first of all because I know he won't bring it up. I had a conversation with him, with Mohan once, about Hospital Bahagia, and that is Uncle Tuan. Uncle Tuan is Tan Sri Mahadevan. He's chief psychiatrist of Malaysia. No, he just Tanjung Rambutan. No, Uncle Tuan used to be the father of modern psychiatry of Malaysia, and his official title is Tan Sri Dato Sri Azlani M. Mahadevan. Yeah, and his mentor. So, and because one time, and he wrote the foreword for my book, but I remember texting him and telling him the story that Uncle Tuan told me about mental health patients. Mental patients. I mean, he used to use mental disease. I forgive the terms, they are quite crude, but to give you the example. And so I always wondered, how did they get from KL to Tanjung Rambutan? It's not an easy place to get to. And he said there was something called the green train. Am I right? The green train. Something to do with the green train. And the story was that they would be put into the cargo train, locked up, shackled, and they would go by the night train, the cargo train, so it would stop in Ipoh. Everyone would come from Tanjung Rambutan, the orderlies would come, take them to the mental hospital. And there they would be shackled again. And when he came back from Harvard and so on, one of the first things he did was to remove that, that cruel, you talk about lobotomies and so on. This is very cruel, you go and chain somebody, and then with his knowledge and expertise, he gave them medicine and created an amazing community. And it is from him that I learned about community psychiatry. Is that right? Community psychiatry? Is there such a thing? Yeah, so he created, and he used his skills to create it, this and give them dignity. So that to me was one of the examples that I can give you. I'm not a psychiatrist, so that's a story that I give you. Now over to you.
Thank you. And what's your name again? Gillian, thank you, Gillian, for that question. And you know that's a really important question because it also reflects how poorly we have advanced in the field of mental health and psychiatry. And historically also, the practitioners of mental health professionals, particularly psychiatrists, probably being one of the most horrible human beings to walk the face of this earth. And I can tell you that because the interventions you mentioned, like lobotomy and ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, these were used not just on people with psychosocial disabilities, but were also used on other groups of people like minorities and those with, sexual, certain genders, and people with different religious persuasions. I mean, Hitler was very happy to enlist the help of psychiatrists during his time to give electroconvulsive therapy as a form of punishment as well. So the history of psychiatry has not been very spectacular, I must say, and therefore I understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to say. And along the way, we have had some medications that were used as well, and again with a lot of side effects in the medications. And while these helped people address the primary symptoms, but people for decades suffered with having to put up with side effects of medications, and they couldn't live a life like everybody else. You see, so for a long time there was very little attention paid to advances and the need to have advances in psychiatric interventions. Even today, although we have come a long way from that, and I must say there are interventions today that are very effective, but again, we don't know, how much more advancement we can have, whether or not these medications also cause issues, whether or not people who take these medications are being used as guinea pigs. But then again, it is not exclusive for mental health. Even it happens with people who have hypertension, who have cholesterol issues and other issues. Some people have been taking a certain medication for 10 years or 20 years, only be told that, recent advances in medical science have proven that the medications that you took for the last 20 years have all been useless. So now where are you going to get the compensation from? Because that's what the doctors told you and convinced you and treated you as though you were a criminal if you didn't conform to what they had prescribed. So unfortunately, people with psychosocial disabilities or mental health problems often suffer the most in this area. All I can say, if there's some words of encouragement here, is that we have made great advances. May not be where we want it to be, but at the same time, in a twin track approach, in a parallel approach, there is also a great deal of remorse of what has happened in the name of psychiatry, in the name of mental health, and there are mechanisms in place now to make sure that such abuses no longer take place. And just to give you one incident, a story that I'll share with you before passing the mic on to Dato Ramli, is that when I worked in Sarawak many years ago, one time I was in Kuching. Of course I covered Kuching, Cebu, Miri, Blaga and the whole works. But when I went to Cebu, I was the first psychiatrist there in that unit. Before that, there was not a doctor, there was a medical assistant who used to carry a portable electroconvulsive machine with him during the ward rounds. And when it was reported that if a patient had tried to run away or abscond, they use the word abscond, then he would say, okay, and then the patient was caught and brought back to the unit. He would say, okay, give this patient ECT. So ECT was used as a form of punishment. This wasn't that long ago, and in our country, not in Hitler's Germany, but in Malaysia, And then there was a time when we had to accommodate a brother of a cabinet minister from Sarawak. He was a cabinet minister, but he was from Sarawak. And the brother who has been treated, the brother was my patient, and he is well. Only thing is, he used to campaign for the opposition party. And those days, you had to align yourself to Barisan. There was no such thing, that you couldn't even dream of having a non-Barisan party, and if you had, then there's something drastically wrong with you. And the brother was campaigning against his brother was a federal cabinet minister belonging to a Barisan national component. What happened? This brother of his used to be airlifted from Cebu and then transferred to the Sentosa hospital, the mental hospital in Kuching, until the election period was over, because he was campaigning against the brother. Things like that actually happened until as recently as more than 20 years ago. Probably about 30 years ago actually. Yeah, thanks.
A very simple question. I haven't read the book, and I'm still thinking about your bullying, and I have a psychiatrist sitting right in front of me. I want to ask you, how do you manage that bipolar personality? They can be rude, they can be very sweet also.
I'll repeat that, yeah. No, that's a very good question, because that's what is happening in many workplaces, yeah. And that's very tragic, because the bipolar person with bipolar disorder can actually be very destructive in the workforce, and of course there are mechanisms in the sense that ideally there should be a way in which there should be a way for a person to bring this up to their superior, to the line manager, but if in case it is the person who has the mental health issues who is the line manager, sometimes it's that person. You can't go to the person and say, I want to complain about you. So you have to bypass that. Yeah. But if you know that, it's also important to understand ultimately the person with bipolar disorder doesn't choose to have a bipolar disorder. So, and that's where close people, family may have to come into the picture. And fortunately, in the case of bipolar disorder, at times one may have to use other ways to persuade them, sometimes even forcefully, involving the family and police and things like that. That has happened many times before. And it's very sad, but it has happened. The good thing is many of the enforcement authorities today have been briefed, and they do understand how to be humane in their approach of this. It's very difficult, when dealing with a person with bipolar disorder. But at the same time, there are many who manage lives well with bipolar disorder, and they bring out the best in them. Some of the cleverest people that we know of in our society may have some symptoms of bipolar as well. They're very creative people. So, the world has benefited from people who have had some mood symptoms, maybe the milder version of bipolar disorder as well. But it is also sad that the suicide rate among people with bipolar disorder is very high. And they do suffer very much, despite them being seen as very bubbly and happy and being live wire, being the center of attraction in a party, center of attention in a party and things like that. But they do suffer inside them. Thanks.
No, it's just that, one of the things that Andrew was talking about, medicines, even now, we really, a lot of people, when it comes to the vaccine, exactly, it's just in front of us. There's a lot of us who think that the vaccine has created another pandemic among us, you see. So we don't know now what is happening, because it's now getting to be a more and more difficult world to know what is truth and what is fake. Now, coming on to another side, because I was a Fulbright scholar where I look at shamanism, and certainly this was an interesting part because of the fact that at one point the Kelantan government had banned a lot of the Malay performing arts, traditional performing arts. So not just Mak Yong, also Wayang Kulit, Mak Yong, Menorah, and all those kind of things. There's quite a number of them. And I am one of the people that say that there is actually a Malay cultural genocide. But one of the very interesting things that it made me go back again into the concept of traditional psychotherapy healing in terms of mind putri that sees two concepts, I think, left over from the animistic. When people talk about Buddhism and Hinduism being a strong part of it, they don't mention that animism was also very important at that time of, say, Bujang Valley or whatever it is, and it's still here. So a lot of the psychological problem had come from, bipolar or whatever it is, that from sakit angin, especially that is the effect from artistic people, because the artistic thing is so strong that if the angin of that person, if angin, say for example writing, or angin Mak Yong is not performed, she goes a little bit wonky. And it's almost like it is a gift that when the gift was not heeded, the gift will curse you back. Yeah, and it happens. So this is a very interesting, so that person may become also quite difficult in the workplace. So I did write an article about this because it is an unfulfilled life, because that angin is not assuaged, it's not given the vent. So this is the importance of therapy from the point of view of arts, culture, all the things that we take for granted. A beautiful thing, painting, writing, eating, nice food, and all these kind of things are very important to let your mind flow in a way that allows you to have a good sense of life, a celebration of life, coming to terms with life. So, say for example, say the Islamic, the fundamentalist is Islam, as we call it, the Wahhabis and the Salafis, make it so austere that the people are not allowed to have this, Professor Dato. Then they will be much more stressed, especially the women, and it requires them no way for escape. And in the Malay context, and it uses the Mak Yong to cure the penyakit angin, because it is a way of curing the extroverted and the introverted Malay psyche. But I think this is a quite interesting thing, because I think in the Jungian tradition also you will find that this comes through. But it requires a little bit more discussion rather than this part. But I think the artistic temperament is a very, very strong source of stress, because someone artistic and you then pigeonhole it to do something, for example, working in class, for example, then they'll get very, very frustrated, and they will react very negatively.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Swagata. Some people know me as Roy. Okay. I want to actually question to Neeta, the writer, but before that, I just want to say that 6 years ago, short of 1 week, she launched her earlier book, Age of Smiling Secrets, and all of us were there, and we are here again, so congratulations. Really happy to be here. And I was listening to all the panelists and everyone who asked the questions, and I'm like, this is serious. This is like, I mean, how do we deal with so many people? And thank you for pointing out this thing about artistic people, because now I think I'll be much more compassionate towards my colleagues who have these kind of things. I think this is very important for all of us to know, and this kind of launches as well as I know discussions should be held oftener. So Neeta, I'm going to move away from all the serious questions, and I'm going to just ask you, I love this book cover, all right? I love the colors, and I want to ask you one question, which is, what inspired this, number one, and why this cover? And second question is, what is your favorite story in your book? If I may ask that. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah. Okay, the cover design. When you work with publishers, designers, they usually ask you a concept and so on and so forth. And it's a synchronicity, because most people think the cover design is me, and actually it's him. Because a photo, because it was a photo from Philharmonic. You had put it on the group, and he had gone to the Philharmonic, they'd taken a photo and he put it on the group, and I looked at it and I thought, I really, really like this photo because it's a person who is looking in the distance, and so I sent it to Penguin, and when they first came with the first draft, that girl was very beautiful. You know, she was young, she was sharp nose, so I said, you can't, this is not going to work, because this girl is too beautiful. All the characters in that, all my protagonists are screwed up somehow and they're middle-aged. You know, you can't have this, so you've got to have the jowls, you've got to have the hook nose, you've got to have this, and if you had seen me last year, I had very long hair, and this year I was ill and I cut my hair, and so what they came up was with this. So now people look at this and curly hair, so they think it's me, but actually it's not, it's him. So yes. As for the colors, they are mental health colors. I love purple, I love and green. And if you know anything about the chakra system, green is Anahata chakra, which is the heart chakra, and purple is the Sahasrara chakra, which is the crown chakra. So heart, brain coherence was in it. So that's how the story of the colors and the cover design. I'm very heartened because there are many people who tell me that, who write to me and say that they love the cover design. And yeah, thank you. Oh, my favorite story. Say hello to Yama, because that is, it involves him. Because Uncle Lamtai, he asked me, it was 2002 November, which is now happening also, there were lots of floods, and behind my house there is monsoon drain, and the developers at the back, they were covering it, and I was so angry that I said to my mother, they're crazy, they cover this monsoon drain, there's no water going to flow, and one day we're just going to die, we're all going to say hello to Yama, because Yama is the god of death. Then I thought, nice title, say hello to Yama. And that was November 2022, Deepavali. December was the Batang Kali, the landslides. In Batang Kali, 31 people died, enormous devastation. January 2023, his column was all about disaster psychiatry, which is his subspecialty. And so I read his column, and by the end of January, he poured out of me. story, and that story has been republished 7 times. It's been shortlisted for the Aesthetica Award. And you know, the other story that I also like is Uncharted Waters, because that has won an award. And then all the stories, and Weatherman Love Letter won the actual award. Golden Illusions is about elder abuse, also won an award. So all the stories are longlisted, shortlisted, won awards, so on and so forth. So I am very grateful to Penguin because they recognized the quality of the book. So, yeah.
A couple of moments ago, you mentioned the word screwed up. Is that politically correct? Should you be using mentally impaired? And I want to ask about the use of language in being a part of this whole kind of like psychological challenges that we face.
Okay, screwed up is screwed up. But even 2 days ago, I was talking to Mohan. He's part of the team, and we were talking about suicide, attempted suicide, and you know, and committing suicide. So he told me that there is now policy decision that you should not use the word commit suicide. You should say attempted suicide. And I'm a lawyer. You know, words are words. So if you ask me, I should be more careful. I know. But forgive me. Huh? Language, well, again, you know, if I don't say screwed up, what do you want me to say? Because the characters in, I know, I get it, but the characters in my story are screwed up. And again, one of the wonderful things about the story, this collection, is many people have, I get really touched when people say to me, they are upset, they are uncomfortable. I'm very happy. That means you know what I wrote, like you said, you know, when you, you know, your rasa, so whatever I felt in writing my stories, you feel reading them. So imagine if you read a story and you're like, it's boring, you know, it's boring, it's very nice, it's this, you know, it's okay. But when you read my story and you love it, and you cry, and you're angry with me for writing that story, I'm really very happy. Because it means that I have managed to evoke some sentiment in you. So I've used language, and okay, so you asked me about language. One of the things that I have been criticized about is in The Incredible Tragedy of the Indian Man. Okay, so the Indian Man, in some I just say The Incredible Tragedy, but in the Indian, and this was an argument that I had with the editor in Penguin, because in the story I use the word chinky. And you know, they are so upset with the word chinky. So, you know, is it politically correct? Is it right? Is it wrong? So my answer to them was, well, you're the editors, you decide. But I will tell you that in every Indian house that you go to, nobody is going to say, you know, the girl that he married is a nice Chinese girl, you know, chinky girl. You know, even my auntie, my cousin got married to a Chinese boy, and I asked my aunt, what is his name? We don't know his name, we just call him China boy. So, you know, to this day he's China boy. If you go and say his actual name, we don't know who he is. So, my point is not that I'm criticizing them. If you want me to write a story that is authentic, how am I supposed to write authentic dialogue if I do not use and say what you write and say? If I use a proper language, nobody is going to buy it. So that was my argument with, and do not think that I have not used the words that Indians are called, because another one was Osek Kelenga, because that was what I used to be called in Penang, without them understanding that I understood Hokkien. So Osek is, it's not dark colored, it's not dark colored, it's black colored Keleng. You know, so if I don't use Osek Kelenga lang, you know, you're not going to know that this is a Penang term. The moment I put it in language, in the dialogue, it sets the setting. So my job as a writer is to make my story as authentic, as truthful, and so on and so forth.